All right, so we're going to launch into session 4, which is on the final dichotomy of judging and perceiving. Now, this is one that anybody who is familiar with Myers-Briggs, this is another one like introversion, extroversion. It's not as accessible in the public consciousness as introvert and extrovert. I would say it's probably on a approximately the same level as thinker feeler for how many people think they know what it means, and they have that little nuance, like the difference that makes all the difference. They've got that off just a little bit. Judger perceiver is the same, and the reason for that is the difference between judging and perceiving is complicated enough in abstraction, meaning that when we go up the ladder of abstraction and explain what's going on between a judger and a perceiver, it's just complicated enough that people kind of get it and kind of don't, and so they run right to the behaviors because the behaviors are a lot easier to understand. And so they overvalue the behavior between the two styles, and it makes them terrible profilers. When you go online and look at, there's just a ton of websites that have like celebrity personality breakdowns, and I had to stop going to those. Like every time I looked at one, I was like, oh, you can't be serious, right? Like you cannot have typed that person as that personality type. You can't have done that. And yet it's prolific and everywhere. And my guess, my suspicion, my speculation is that it's a misunderstanding of the judging and perceiving dichotomy that makes people so terrible at profiling others. So if you can wrap your head around this piece, you will be way ahead of the game. Judging and perceiving, quite complex, and then once you get it, you're like, oh, now I see the difference. And this will be, again, a big piece of the backbone when we go through cognitive functions and the 16 types. All right. So let's launch straight into it. So, and I'll be getting to I'll show you the slide that has the bullet points, and I'll be getting to that in just a moment. But I just want to kind of talk about, I'm trying to remove the phrase, I'll just be totally honest. In this program, I'm trying to remove the phrase kind of from my teaching style. So I'm calling myself out right now, and every time I say the word kind of, I want you to push me with your finger on, like, in the chat room, like, stop saying, poke me, saying, stop saying kind of. The difference between a judger and a perceiver is in the same way that introverts and extroverts manage their personal energy by engaging with the world that is the real world, judging and perceiving inform how we organize both of those worlds and where we want to experience freedom. All right, I'm going to repeat that. Judging and perceiving inform how we organize our world and how we experience freedom. All right, so which world, like, remember with introverts and extroverts, it was which world was the real world. For an introvert, it's the inner world that's the real world, and for an extrovert, it's the outer world that's the real world. Okay, so we're still going to be talking about inner and outer world, all right? So it's judging and perceiving is the relationship that we have with our inner world and outer world, like introversion and extroversion. However, it's not about which world is real. It's about which of those two worlds we want organized, and which one of those worlds we want to be able to experience freedom. All right, which world, the inner world or the outer world, do we want to have organized, and which world do we want to experience freedom? All right, so judging and perceiving is approximately, like, introvert, extrovert is 50-50, sensing, intuition is 25-75. When you take both genders into account, thinking, feeling is like a 40-60 or maybe a 45-55 split. Judging and perceiving is about a 45-55 split too, favoring judgers. There's actually slightly more judgers in the world than there are perceivers. 55% of the population approximately is judging. 45% of the population is approximately perceiving, or judger and perceiver. Now, the judging-perceiving dichotomy is, again, conceptually complicated, so bear with me. All right, we're going to look at it from enough angles so that you'll be able to get this piece. So to understand the judger perceiver split, we have to understand the difference between the inner world and the outer world. All right. The inner world for, again, let's talk about introverts and extroverts. For an introvert, the inner world's the real world. For an extrovert, the outer world's the real world. So let's just be thinking in terms of inner world and outer world. There's two worlds that we reference as human beings. As an individual, right, as Antonia, I reference primarily two worlds for my, to have a complete picture. I reference what's going on inside of Antonia, and then I reference what's going on outside of Antonia in the world around me. Inner world, outer world. Inner world, outer world, okay? So a judger wants that outer world, they want that outer world to be organized. They want the outer world to be organized so that they can experience freedom in their inner world. All right? If they have outer world organization, that means they get to experience freedom within themselves. For a perceiver, it goes the opposite direction. A perceiver wants to have freedom in their outer world. And in order to have freedom in the outside world, they have to have their inner world organized. All right? So all human beings, regardless of whether or not they're a judge or a perceiver, all human beings need organization and they need freedom. All right? They can't be completely locked down, locked in. They can't experience that. And they can't have nothing but freedom and chaos running their life. They have to have a measure of organization and they have to have a measure of freedom. All human beings need that. Which of those worlds, the inner world or the outer world, is the one that you want to experience those two components? Now, the reason why a judger prefers organization in the outer world is because when they go inside of themselves, right, when they journey inside, when I say they want to experience freedom there, I mean they want to be able to, and I call this, I mean, this is very flowery speech, but I call it wandering the garden of your mind. You don't want to have necessarily a specific end game. Every time you go in your mind, you don't want to have to be like trying to figure something out. You might just want to sort of watch your mind work. You want to be able to see what it has to offer. It might come up with a concept or a conclusion, or it might come up with something, a memory, or it might come up with an aha, and you just sort of follow your mind to its destination. You let it do its thing, and you're along for the ride. For a judger, that is very satisfying, to be able to go inside of themselves and just let their mind take them whatever trip their mind wants to take them on. However, that's an all-encompassing experience. And when a judger goes inside their mind, they might be on a trail, right? Their mind might be taking them on a trail that any distraction in the outer world will jar them out of, and they might never get on that trail again, right? Let me explain that, or excuse me, let me repeat that. They might be on a train of thoughts. They might be on a trail, and it could be a good one. It could be one that leads them to a profound aha. And when they're on that trail, if something in the outer world distracts them or throws them off, they might never be able to find that trail again. So that is just as satisfying as it is for a judger to go inside themselves and wander their mind to follow those paths and trails. Just as satisfying as that is, the converse is true when they get knocked off that path. It's incredibly dissatisfying. In fact, it's incredibly frustrating when that happens. So over time, just like a thinker creates the strategy of being more cool and impersonal in conversation because they know they have to have that strategy to make their best decisions later, the same thing with judging and perceiving. The judging person, the judger person, will create strategies throughout a lifetime that gets them to be able to do that wonderful freedom experiencing, trip of wandering their mind. And that means over time, they will start organizing their outside world to mitigate distractions. That's fundamentally what it's about. It's about mitigating distraction. If I put an object in this spot and I know it's going to be there every time, that means that I can just go up and grab the scissors out of the scissor drawer and I don't have to think about it, right? Like I don't have to try to organize that. So when I go inside my mind, it's not a matter of like, oh gosh, where did I leave the scissors? It's like, oh, the scissors were there. And when I go inside my mind, I get to go back into wandering the garden, right? So it's inner world freedom, outer world organization. Inner world freedom, outer world organization. And a judger that is very concerned with outer world organization is generally somebody who is trying to create a system that is so elegant that they never have to think about it again. That's the judger ultimate, like penultimate goal. I create a system that is so elegant, I never have to think about it again. Now, of course, such a thing doesn't exist in reality. Everything needs maintenance. And at the same time, why not try? Why not make that happen if possible? All right, so that's the judger perspective. The perceiver perspective, or the perceiver way of interacting with this, is that they reverse that order. They want freedom in the outside world. Freedom in the outside world means freedom to explore, freedom to push buttons, like physical, literal buttons, or the buttons on other people, right? To just kind of figure out what does the outside world have to throw at them, right? If I do this, then what will happen? If I do this, what will happen? And because they have a desire to have freedom in the outside world, they become less militant about creating organization. If they lose their scissors, that's not that big of a deal. They'll just go find their scissors, right? The outside world is a world of exploration. It doesn't have to be super organized every time. Now, in order to do that, right, in order to have freedom in the outside world, it means that when they tag a piece of information inside of themselves, they have to be very organized internally to grab that information as fast as possible. Just like a judger wants to know where the scissors are, right, in the scissor drawer every time they put the scissors away, a perceiver has to do that with their thoughts and their feelings. They have to organize their thoughts and feelings in such a precise way that as soon as they go hunting for it, they can immediately find it. All right? Perceivers, judges will look at perceivers and say, you are so disorganized, you are so chaotic, I don't even know how you live like that. And what they're not realizing is that inside of a perceiver is an incredibly organized thought process, or a very organized way of feeling. Perceivers will say that they map their emotions. They have like entire clouds of emotions that they've mapped completely, or they'll have entire concepts, thoughts and concepts that they've mapped out, like those brain cloud or those word clouds that you'll see on, I don't know, like thesaurus websites or dictionary websites, and they have that word cloud where like some of the words are bigger than others because they're more and less relevant. And for a perceiver, their thoughts and their emotions are very much like that. They're very much organized in the way that makes sense to the person, but it is thoroughly organized. So the reason for this is, I like to use the example of an athlete as a perceiver. If an athlete, or like let's say a basketball player, if a basketball player has they have to be able to turn on a dime. If they want full freedom in the outside world, basketball is a great way to do that, because they get to go on this side of the court or this side of the court, or like they get to throw it to somebody, gets a fellow teammate, or it gets thrown back at them, and it's a lot of improvisation. Getting the basket into the hoop has a lot of improvisation from one side of the court to the next. But the only way to be able to actually be able to, like immediately respond to the outside world, no matter what the stimulation is being thrown at the person, they have to have little pieces of information readily available, like what is the specific angle of my wrist that I need to be tipping my wrist at in order for the ball to go into the hoop. All right. In order for the ball to perfectly land the hoop, what is the specific angle of my wrist that I need? That's a piece of information that they have to instantly be able to call upon. It's got to be right there. It's got to be in that drawer, right? What's the angle of the wrist that I'm looking for? It's right where I left it. So I know it's right here, and then I make the shot, and then the ball goes in the hoop. So for perceivers, again, they want to be able to improvise. They want to be able to be spontaneous. They want their outer world to be their plaything, right? This is their playground. The outer world's their playground. Turn on a dime. Be spontaneous. Improvise. I don't have to put things away. I mean, if I want to, I can, but it's not like a necessity. But in order to accomplish the things that they want to accomplish in improvisation, they have to be able to call upon information very quickly. So their inner world has to be very organized. And a judger goes the opposite. Their freedom, their spontaneity, their improv, that all happens inside of them. That's internal as they're thinking. They're allowing their brain to take them to conclusions that could be profound and amazing ahas. But the only way to do that is to mitigate distraction in the outside world, and that means organization. All right. This is, again, the most complicated of all the dichotomies to understand. I need to check in with the chat room. Please do not be shy. Are you getting this? Is this making sense? Very abstract, I know. We'll talk about behaviors in a moment, but is this making sense to you? Dana says yes. Okay, cool. Please don't be shy. If it's not making sense, please let me know. It's making a lot of sense. Okay. Cool. either either a cat stepped on Babs's keyboard, or she had an aneurysm, or okay, almost maybe, but not quite yet. Okay. All right. All right. So, can I check in with you at the sticking point? Or do you not know? I mean, I get it. Sometimes the sticking point, you can't even tell what the sticking point is. Almost maybe, but not quite yet. Okay. Maybe if we go through some of the behaviors, maybe that will help bring up some of those sticking points. Okay. Time to process needed. Of course, there is a certain percentage of there's a certain personality type that always needs to post-process, and if you're one of those, that's cool. You'll get it, right? It's just a matter of post-processing. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the difference between judges and perceivers as you see on the table, you know, some of their behaviors, etc. So judgers, because again of that distillation, outer world organization, inner world freedom, they're uncomfortable when they don't know what to expect because they can't prepare. They're not used to improvising in the outer world. They're not used to having to turn on a dime. So they are almost always more comfortable when they know what's coming down the pike. Then they can prepare for it. They can start to create an outer world system that helps them to deal with the unknown. Perceivers, on the other hand, are focused when they don't know what to expect. So they're not uncomfortable, they're focused, all right? When they're thrown into an improvisation situation, it's not like they're comfortable or uncomfortable, they're just on, all right? This is the time period that they need to be improvising. This is the time that they need to be pulling all of that information inside of them that's so well organized, so they're focused in a moment of improvisation. Judges are uncomfortable in that moment, perceivers are focused. Judgers, as you can imagine, tend to follow plans, right? That makes sense. They're following plans. They're trying to figure out what's the next thing, right? I'm trying to create that system that all but takes care of itself. I don't have to think about it. So a plan makes it so I don't have to think. If I've got my schedule lined up all day, then I just wake up, I look at my schedule, I go do that thing, and I don't have to think about it. Whereas perceivers have a tendency to follow their impulses. All right. Impulses are a lot more interesting because I don't want everything in my outer world to be perfectly lined up. That's not interesting. That means that I'm confined. Now, one thing that's very important to remember as I go through this list is that we need freedom and we need organization, right? That's why one of the worlds is allocated to freedom and one of the worlds is allocated to organization. If we experience freedom in both worlds, we become a nut job. And when we experience organization in both worlds, we become a nut job. The reason for this is too much openness, all right? Too much openness does not allow us to have any sort of direction. It doesn't give us any frame. It's kind of like a little kid, like a 2-year-old that runs its own house. It gets insecure and it doesn't know what to do. Versus a person who has organization basically pushed on them in both worlds, that they have to be organized in both worlds, that gives them a sense of being in a straitjacket, right? There is no breathing room. They can't breathe if they have to have organization in both places. So we get these moments of it. You can see like a judger that doesn't have an organized space. You can feel them kind of get like a panicky or a sense of panic because they don't know what to do now. There's a lot of analysis paralysis that comes along with a judger not having a very organized space. They just don't know what to do. Whereas you can see a perceiver that's forced to be like militant about their outer world. A lot of times they'll just feel confined. They'll feel stifled. They'll feel like there's really nothing interesting happening. It's almost like they don't even have any breathing room. So it's important that the types are able to honor their process, right? Like, again, if you're going to end up using this for relationship coaching at some point, you've got a judger and a perceiver that are married, or if you're going to use it in a business context and you see judges and perceivers that are working together, you can see how each of them will overvalue their experience and try to force their modality onto the other, and you can see how that just creates massive resistance. And of course it would, because you're trying to tell the other person that they're not allowed to either have freedom or they're not allowed to have organization. And that is an insecure or confining, stifling spot no matter who you are. So this is a really good thing to understand when it comes to dynamics and social dynamics, and how these two types tend to, unfortunately foist their modality on another, only with bad results. That said, there are judgers that can be delightfully spontaneous at times in the right context, and there are perceivers who are good at, say, keeping their house clean. Right? It's not like we're only one or the other and that's just it, and you're doomed for the rest of your life. There are obviously behaviors, and when we get to the cognitive functions, we'll see why. There are things that assist us in dipping our fingers or our toes into the other pool. But as a general rule, these are our preferences. All right, so judgers, we talked about how judgers are usually better at long-term planning, okay, because they like to follow plans. They want the system to be running itself. They're better at long-term planning because that means that they can free up their mind. Whereas perceivers are usually better at responding to crisis, all right? They aren't so good at long-term planning, but that's because they know if something bad happens, they'll just show up, they'll get focused, and they'll be able to handle it. Perceivers are oftentimes the stereotypical firefighter type. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're literally have chosen a career in firefighting, but it does mean that when a fire starts to, like some fire starts to burst out, it's a perceiver who's really good at just coming in and putting the fire out. Judgers tend to be early or on time, and perceivers tend to be on time or late. It's because they're not managing their schedules as closely as a judger is. For judgers, they want a system that doesn't require thought. To be on time or early means that they don't have to think about it. They don't have to make apologies. They don't have to, be frazzled. They can just show up, and that frees their mind. Whereas a perceiver wants to have that spontaneity, so they might have said, yeah, I'll be there in 20 minutes, and then, ooh, shiny, and then suddenly they're wandering off to perceive this fun thing, and they're like, oh, crap, I only have 10 minutes to get there, and it's a 20-minute drive. So perceivers have a tendency to get distracted, and so they're not, it's not as critical for them to be on time, which is clearly something you probably have seen an argument between two people have. Most people have seen that argument happen, and there might be one of the people in the argument on either side. Judgers take pleasure in finishing projects. They love to close loop. It's so satisfying when a loop is closed because then they don't have to think about it. Whereas perceivers take more pleasure in starting projects because it's brand new. It's all new. It's exciting. It could go anywhere. And so the beginning of a project is more interesting to a perceiver, whereas the end or the final closing of a project is more interesting to a judger. Judgers think about the future or the past. They have longer timelines, whereas perceivers have a tendency to be more focused in the present moment. And judgers are distracted by a chaotic environment. Again, if a judger is surrounded by chaos, right, the freedom in the outside world, that just puts them in an insecure spot of I don't know what to do. Whereas perceivers are more indifferent to, or even sometimes energized by a chaotic environment. Now, we could be talking chaos, like I'm looking at our studio and our library and our office are sort of kind of compiled together, and it's not the most organized space. I'm a perceiver. My husband's a perceiver. We are not the most organized people. And I wouldn't say that this energizes me, but if something started getting really chaotic inside, if a fire, like not a literal fire, but if something really kind of juiced us and went, oh my goodness, there's an emergency to put out, we'd run in, we'd get focused, we'd get interested, we'd get energized by this emergency. And the fact that it's not the most organized space is not that big of a deal. Whereas for a judger, I'm sure if they saw our library, it would make them want to stab their face. Now, I know some judgers that are like that, and they hate their lives. A judger that has a very disorganized space, office space, etc., they oftentimes are very unhappy with that. So it does happen, but they're usually not okay with it. Judges are at their best in familiar environments, whereas perceivers are at their best in stimulating environments, and new is often stimulating. Judges are frustrated by open loops, and perceivers are frustrated by restricted options. So again, what makes it so you don't have to think? That's the thing that a judge is going to like. What makes it so you engage with your environment and get juiced up there? That's what a perceiver is going to like. And restricted options means that they're getting organization inner and outer world, and that just makes them feel like they're in a straitjacket. Judges understand social structure and are more likely to be compliant, right? Because that's a system that takes care of itself and we don't have to think about it. Whereas perceivers are more likely to be counterculture and rebellious about social rules. They want freedom in the outside world. Social structures are binding, right? Like, I don't want to have to care about your social rules. Whereas a judge is a lot more likely to understand the point of it and recognize that it actually frees most people up for not having to constantly reevaluate rules. And judges focus on when they don't know what to expect, are focused when they don't know what to expect, whereas perceivers are usually enjoying the thrill of an uncertainty. Again, freedom in the outside world, organization inner world, versus organization in the inner world, freedom in the outside world. Did I just say the same thing twice? Let me repeat that. Freedom in the outside world, organization in the inner world, freedom in the underworld, organization in the outer world. Okay. All right. So in the wild, how do you determine if somebody's a judge or a perceiver in the wild? Well, that can be easier to spot. There's some subtleties that make this at times more complicated, but for the most part, you're going to probably see some of these behaviors really come up. Some obvious signs is that judges have a tendency to be more put together in their dress and grooming. Usually not hairs out of place, usually everything kind of matches. And it's because they're observing social contracts of dress and grooming oftentimes, and they want to fall into the social contract because that frees everybody up for a more pleasant experience. They're more put together, they have a tidy appearance, they usually have more controlled posture, they're less likely to be slouchy. And they move more carefully and deliberately. Their vehicles are more likely to be tidy. Okay, they're more likely to be the kind of person who actually vacuums their car. I haven't vacuumed my car in the entire 20-something years that I've had cars. I mean, that's not true. Obviously, I vacuumed them sometimes, but it's not really something that's on my radar. Judges have a tendency, and not that I'm the only perceiver on the planet. There's some perceivers that love their cars vacuumed, including my father, who would choke on his tongue if he saw my car or my vehicle. And so there are perceivers that like that too, but judges have a tendency as a rule to be more oriented towards a tidy car, a tidy appearance. They might not have vacuumed their cars, but you're probably not going to see McDonald's bags floating around. All right. Whereas a perceiver, they may or may not have a vacuumed out car, but if something's thrown casually in the back seat, that's probably not going to make them go crazy. Perceivers, on the other hand, are less fastidious. They're not necessarily messy or tasseled, but they are more casual. And when they dress up, they're going to have a flair or some artistry in their dress. They're going to have something that's a little unusual, that is maybe counterculture, or just something that is more expressive. They are more likely to be counterculture, so they dress for themselves. Judges dress for other people, for that social contract piece, whereas perceivers are more likely to dress for themselves and for self-expression. They have more fluid movements as a general rule. They tend to be more slouchy or hang on furniture. You can kind of see them sort of throw their knee over the side of a couch, or kind of, even if they're introverted and have otherwise quiet gestures, I've seen them do things just throw their arms over the side of a couch in a new environment, which is something a judger might not do because they would want to know what their social rules of the house were first. They are they have a tendency to tuck their feet up when they're sitting. They're just it's more like they're comfortable in the environment. They're not looking for the rules that tell them how to behave. It's more like they're deciding what rules they're going to bring to every context, because again, their organization is internal. So what they decide is the rule, the quote-unquote rule, they're going to bring to all of their contexts. Whereas the judges are going to be more sensitive to what the rules of that context are. And, judges are more likely to be considered, they're going to consider a social context when they're determining how to behave and dress. Perceivers are going to determine how they feel or think before they enter any sort of situation. For example, a perceiver is a lot more likely to wear, say, Converse shoes with a tuxedo. All right, and a judger is a lot less likely to do that, because the judger is going to wear nice shoes to go with their tuxedo. Why dress up, in a tuxedo if you're just going to wear Converse? Whereas a perceiver is going to do that as their little piece of flair. All right. And, when it comes to tasks, judges are more likely to get their tasks done early, right? Perceivers are more likely to push to the 11th hour, to use that adrenaline to push them through. It's very common for perceivers to, sometimes perceivers will manufacture fires because they're so good at putting them out, and that gives them an extra oomph so you get something done. Whereas a judger is going to feel that's going to be very unsettling to them. So I don't think a judger would ever intentionally create a fire to force themselves into action and use the adrenaline, because they're not really going to have the same relationship with a fire that a perceiver will. All right. So here's the exercise for if you're interested in profiler training certification. Here is your exercise for judges and perceivers. Write a short post in the members area and identify yourself as a judger or a perceiver. So are you a judger or are you a perceiver? Write a paragraph about how much you enjoy freedom in your chosen realm. So if you're a judger, this would be the inner world. How much do you enjoy freedom in the inner world? And if you're a perceiver, how much do you enjoy freedom in the outer world? Write another paragraph about how much you need organization and structure in the opposite realm. So if you're a judger, loving your freedom in your inner world means that you need structure in your outer world. And how does that look for you? Like, how does that need for organization manifest in your life? And for those of you that are perceivers, how does that organization in the inner world manifest for you? How do you experience needing that organization internally in order to have your outer world freedom? And what happens when you don't get the structure you need? What ends up happening? So just kind of share your experience. Your exercise is to share your personal experience as a judge and perceiver, and now that you understand the difference, how does it manifest for you? How is that showing up for you in all of those realms, and how much do you need that organization in the realm of your chosen, in your chosen realm? For the rest of this week, observe how these two needs play out in your life. So for the rest of the week, for the rest of your life, however long it takes, observe how long or how these two needs play out in you as a judge or a perceiver, and whether or not they cause conflict with other people. That's the big one. How is this causing conflict with maybe your mate, with people that are in your immediate family, with your business, your clients, your workmates, etc.? How does this show up? And observe how everybody has these same needs, though they might play out in different ways. So really be observing judges and perceivers and notice how these needs play out in their life and how you're impacted by them and how other people are impacted by them. All right, so that is the exercise for those of you interested in profiler training certification. And what we're going to do now that we've gone over the 4 dichotomies is we're going to enter into the second module of cognitive function. So this is where you really need to buckle up. This is when things are going to get really deep. And so be prepared to wrap your mind around cognitive function soon. You're going to learn something that's a very powerful portion of the tool. It's going to really need a lot of your concentration and effort, because this is the part that trips most people up, but it's also the most intriguing. So I will see you at the next session starting module 2 on the cognitive functions.